Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of Black Mental Health is Black Health. I'm your host, Bronwyn Lucas, and I am so glad you're here tonight. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Megan Pickens, and we'll find out who she is in just a moment. But if you've ever been here before, you know that we have to do some deep breathing to get our night started. Why? Deep breathing allows us to decompress from the day. If you've had a day that's been filled with just stuff and sometimes trauma and drama, you need to just get over it. It also allows you to know that at any time, you can stop and do some deep breathing just to allow yourself to have that woosah moment. So, this is your time to practice. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to count to four, and I'll say breathe in, and I'll give you a slow count of four. Then I'm going to say hold and give you another count of four, and then I'll say breathe out and give you another count of four. And we'll do this for three times, and we'll see how you feel about that. Dr. Pickens, we're going to ask you to join us in our breathing, and we'll see
I
you
know
give
I'm coming.
everybody, okay? So here we go. Breathe in, two, three, four, out, two, three, four. In, two, three, four. Hold, two, three, four. Out, two, three, four. In, two, three, four. Hold, two, three, four. Out, two, three, four. How did that feel?
It felt like that's the first time I was that still today.
You know, there's a whole lot to be said for being able to be still. So,
Hmm.
yes, that can be a good thing.
Yes.
So that's why we always start with that breathing. And we're going to actually have a show just about that. I got to talk to you, Dr. Megan, about who I want to do that. I'll refresh your memory later on.
Yes,
So
please
our
do.
guest is Dr. Megan Pickens. And so who are you? What do you do? And tell us something cool about you.
Well, I am a therapist in private practice out in Arlington. I specialize in work with high achieving Black women and their partners that want to have, healthier relationships. I also do a lot of work with other counselors and supervisors. I provide the 40-hour supervisor training and the 6-hour supervisor refresher and some more trainings that I'm coming up with. And I am, in addition to that, I'm the president of TASES, which is the Texas Association of Counselor Education and Supervision. We just finished our conference this last weekend. Um, Something cool about me. I can play instruments. I just don't play instruments. I can play the cello, violin, and viola, and I can also read music. I know how to read music. Um, and then I can play the guitar as well. So that's the cool thing about me.
And here's something interesting. I play violin and viola.
Hmm.
Didn't know that. We didn't know that about each other. So you see, you learn some things when we find out what's cool. That is awesome. So thank you for sharing. Well, tonight's topic is trauma, race, and police. Being Black in America. Now, that's a lot right there. When you
Hmm.
hear it, I've had some interesting comments when people even just heard the topic. Just hearing that topic makes people go, oh, wow. It stirs up a lot. But I want to start off with some definitions. I think it's really good to know that when we're using terms, we're using them and have the same meaning. So, Megan, I'm going to ask you, tell our audience what is trauma? Give us a real definition because we throw that term out a lot. So, what is trauma? What does that mean?
Well, it's not always the buzzword du jour, but it's essentially a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So, something that has happened to you or a person that has affected the way that they see things, interact to things, and experience things. So I would
Mm.
say that that's the kind of easy peasy version of it. And it does not have to be complex trauma like a war or something like that. It could be trauma from emotional abuse, which is, verbal. So it's not physical. So it does not have to be physical. But there are different forms of trauma. So that's my definition.
I like that. It's quick and sweet. There's something I wanted to add to that. There's a trauma, and this is where I want to go with this topic. When we watch the news itself can be somewhat traumatizing.
Yes.
Um, when we look at the violence perpetrated against Black people by police, that can feel traumatizing. What do you have to say about that?
Well, we kind of discussed this, and I tell everybody actually, I have never seen the George Floyd video. I've seen clips of it. I actually probably haven't seen a full video of police brutality on Black people since probably Rodney King, and that's a super long time ago. And that was before I knew really what I was watching and like how traumatic it was. But I am intentional about not watching it. I think that it can desensitize us to the pain of other people, and I think it can make violence normal, because then people, when you're watching it on TV, it's easy for a lot of people to keep themselves detached from what's actually happening, and so they might not make any moves to do something about it, or they might prejudge the person who's the victim just based on maybe what the press says or what they see, what they perceive. There's a lot of talk about, oh well, just don't resist. um there's a lot of people who didn't resist. There's a little boy who tried to get some orange, had orange juice in his pocket. He wasn't resisting at all. And the only reason why I know what's going on, what happened in a lot of the videos, because it's talked so much about, we're bombarded with it. So even
Mhm.
if you don't watch it, you know enough details about it to almost have watched it. But I just don't take that extra step, and I do not watch the videos.
And this interesting comment you made that it can desensitize us to violence. Back in the 60s, Albert Bandura, who was a social psychologist, did an experiment where people watched violence. These were children, and they watched someone punch a doll, and it was, a non-human being, but he watched them punch that, and they had to. I'm trying to remember. We hadn't talked about this, but I'm trying to remember. They had to do something else just in watching violence, and then they had to have another act. And those kids who saw a violent act, that's what it was, those who saw a violent act punched harder and more aggressively than kids who did not. And it was, to say that, watching it impacts you. And I hadn't thought about that until you just said it. That, yeah, so as we watch it, it becomes part of who you are. And it's not, you don't see it as you're inflicting that much pain either.
Right.
It's just something you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the
It's
other
just
side,
like watching a Walmart. Well, I don't know if Walmart has commercials. I don't really watch a lot of TV, but I'll say just like watching a commercial. People just
mhm,
see it and they're so desensitized to it. It's like, oh, there's another one.
mhm. And the other side, it can either make you sensitive to it, or it can also heighten it. And every time you see it, you feel like you're being traumatized again.
Mm-hmm.
I had clients who, when what's the last gentleman that was killed by the 5 Black officers, and they promoted that it's going to be on the 5 o'clock news, and you just kept hearing it over and over, and it was all about ratings, really. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember that day having a client who was, we talked about it in therapy because it just triggered her to hear it.
Right.
Well, I hope you don't plan to watch it, because of hearing it and us talking about it, and we had to do some deep breathing in that session. We had to bring her down, and I said, if you have this response to a promo, why do you think you need to witness it?
Right.
How is it going to impact your life? You know it happened. You know it's real. Do you need to see it? And she was like, no.
No.
So we don't. So, it can either desensitize or re traumatize. And when I say re traumatize, every time you see one, for me, I hear it hurts. So I too don't watch it. I don't need to see it. I'm a visual person. So if I see it, it's going to be here, and I'm not going to be able to let go of that. And I can think of
Yes.
the flashes that I've seen, and in talking about them, they come up in my mind. But to watch the whole thing, no, no.
Yes, I don't. Yeah, I don't want that replaying in my head. Like I can't. I'm not ready. I can't do that. Well, I don't think I'll
Mm-mm.
ever be ready. I can't say I'm not ready.
I don't think I want to be ready. I don't
Exactly,
think
and I
I
don't want
want.
to be desensitized to it either.
Yeah,
You know,
I
to
don't
where
want to be right. I
it
don't want
doesn't
to get to
mean
either
anything.
extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't thought about the extreme being desensitized, but yes. And that's pretty much like there is that impact our kids have in playing the video games that are
Mm-hmm.
violent. And so and again, it's on the screen, it's not me. So you can definitely be desensitized. Other than being desensitized, can you think of some other harmful effects that impact us mentally, physically, and even spiritually just by being exposed to this? We definitely see the mental health, those things. Can you think of how some physical manifestations it might have?
I think there has been an increase of anxiety in interaction, probably with the police. Like, even, growing up, I didn't grow up in a um, big city, and so we knew all the police. Like, my friend's dad was a policeman, and so all his friends were policemen, and we were around them, and there was never this fear of them like it is now. Like, for me, even. And then, of course, we know there doesn't have to be any illegal activity going on, any criminal activity. However, I will just say that I don't participate in illegal activities, just like regularly. That's like not my thing.
Mhm.
But even driving past the police, um, the anxiety of my daughter and my stepkids, or even my mom getting stopped by the police, all of that stuff heightened for me, to the point where my mom, who used to drive back and forth to Kansas, which is where we're from, by herself, I started telling her I didn't want her driving by herself, because it's just, to me, it's just like you get stopped by one wrong policeman or whatever. And so I'm not a person that believes that they're all just horrible, but I just feel like all you need is to stop by one bad one. And from here to Kansas, you're going through Oklahoma. So I just, yeah,
Mhm.
there's a sense of anxiety just driving on the street, going where I'm supposed to be going. I have insurance. I have, my tags. I don't, my brake lights work, all of that, but they pull up behind me and I'm nervous. Because I don't want to get pulled over for any reason. Like, I don't want to have to interact at all, because there's just like this underlying fear that you just might catch somebody on the wrong day.
And that fear totally impacts our mental health, because you were right. You're driving along and you see a policeman next to you. There's that
Mm-hmm.
moment or that twinge. And so that definitely has an impact on our mental health. And when you think about how it impacts our physical health, when you stay in that heightened state,
Yes.
you have that fear over and over, that's not a healthy thing for us to be
Right.
in.
That constant flow of adrenaline. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And just like you said, I'm driving down the street and I'm good. I'm good. Oh, I don't want to move too much. I'm jamming in the car. There's a policeman next to me. I'm listening to my music. But the fact that you have to have that thought process and stop, that adrenaline starts to flow, and physiologically, that's not a healthy thing.
I turn on the cruise control just to make sure that I'm not speeding. I'm like, no, there's no reason for you to pull me over for anything.
Hmm.
I'm going 1 mile or two under the speed limit,
And the
and I'm
fact that we
on the
have to
straight.
have, right, 10 and 2, the
Right.
fact that that much thought has to go into it.
Yes.
Scary. And you said it as a parent, you really freak out because, oh Lord, my child in the car. I have a, black male son. Oh
Hmm.
Lord, in the car. And those are the things we think about. And so even so when you're not driving, but the thought that that can happen keeps you that adrenaline flowing when they're out. They're out at night and they're doing what people do, what kids do. But it's like, oh, so that fear is
Yeah.
not.
And I
Um,
can remember telling my kids, like, make sure no tail light is out, and if you need your license renewed, your tags renewed, and all, like, don't let any of that stuff go out. Don't just be riding around, trying to do things on your own and not ask for help. Like, we don't want you to draw any attention to the police. Like, it was a full level anxiety.
And that's it. Our anxiety is totally raised just by being there. That is
Mm-hmm.
crazy. What
Yes.
can you tell us? So, what are some things that happens to the body when we do stay in the state of fear physiologically? What's going on in the body?
Well, definitely for women, adrenaline and all of that is a stress hormone. And so, how women are always saying, oh, I can't lose this gut or, that kind of area just above, like in your stomach or whatever. But
The gut. We know what the gut is.
yes, so your body, as a woman, your body is built to, protect the baby, whether the baby is there or not. And so it builds a nice little padding when you're stressed out to keep your body safe. And so it'll build up in that area, even if you're not carrying a kid, planning on having one or anything like that. The body is a well-oiled machine, and so it will
Mhm.
add a layer of protection to make sure that you're safe for procreation.
Mm. So, what about when you're past that age?
It'll still do it.
Hmm.
That's why I said whether or not it's there, that is, what it's engineered for. So it has all these like kind of underlying, protections and things that we don't have any control over.
Right. And something that we don't think about, that how that fear impacts us physiologically. And as women, that's a biggie. And
Mm-hmm.
and we can live in that fear. And this specific we were talking about is not going anywhere. And back to watching it on TV, it can heighten your fear. So if you watch some of the things that's going on that the police are doing, you're watching it and you see it and you go get in the car, your fear level has increased just because you saw that. So that's another reason I'm like, do you really need to watch all this? Is it really going to help you? And, I think you would agree, no, not necessarily. It was going to increase that fear. It also, what about anxiety? What are some things you can talk about? Because it increases the fear, but it also
Mm-hmm.
increases anxiety as a whole. What are some things you can say about anxiety?
I was also going to say that it can affect your sleep and your quality of sleep, depending on, there's, say, the 10 o'clock news. A lot of people watch the news before they go to bed. So watching all of that and intaking that can also affect if you sleep or the quality of your sleep. Because if you're tossing and turning, and like you said, you're visual. So for visual people, you kind of can imprint a lot of things. And so that's just turned over and over in your mind while you're trying to sleep. So I just wanted to add that is another part,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, as far as you asked me a question again, I'm sorry.
I ask about anxiety, but I want to go back to sleep for a minute because
Hmm.
what I want us to see is just how one thing impacts another, just like you did with the fear and the gut and not being able to lose that weight in your stomach because it's holding that fear there. With the sleep, when we don't get enough sleep, that has long-term effects on us physically and emotionally.
Hmm.
So when you don't get enough sleep on the quick end, you're just cranky.
Yes.
You're more cranky, you're more short tempered, your
Hmm.
anxiety can be heightened because you're not thinking clearly. Um,
Right.
when you don't get enough sleep, it tears down things in your body. Physiologically, your body, sleep is designed for our body to regroup and regenerate overnight and build
Hmm.
back up. So if you don't get enough sleep, your body isn't getting what it needs to regroup and refresh for the next day. And prolonged lack of sleep, if it goes on and your sleep is disturbed overnight, that has physiological and mental repercussions. So just the fact that, like you say, I'm watching the 10 o'clock news and I'm tossing and turning, and I
Hmm.
watch 10 o'clock news and it's 1 o'clock and I'm still tossing and turning because I can't get that out of my head. Oh, well, that's why.
Right,
And
and sleep
you're
problems are considered, difficulty falling asleep and then waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble going
Mhm,
back to sleep. So you might be sleeping, but the quality of that sleep is affected.
mhm. And not having good quality sleep has those long-term repercussions.
And it's the same as not getting sleep. And then, I read something, I was working on a training and they were talking about how sleep driving is actually even more dangerous than drunk driving.
Yes.
And a lot of accidents are caused by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you're not getting adequate sleep, and I've done it before. I mean, I just finished a PhD a couple of years ago, and I can tell you, about taking that long blink at the light, not realizing that you've done it. Like I did that and it scared me. And I was just like, okay, I need to stay at home. I need to get some sleep. I'm going to have to write.
You muted yourself.
Accidentally, I know I muted myself. It's crazy touchpad. So just, so there's a lot of ways to be sleeping, but not actually sleeping and not
Mm-hmm.
health, enough for you. And just not sleeping enough because a lot of people don't. We go to bed with these screens, not just the TV screen, but the phone screen and all of that. And that's all stimulus. So it makes it harder to wind down.
Mm-hmm. Um, my question was, in thinking about what we see and what we do, what about anxiety? And of course, the first we looked at just our mood, but now what about anxiety? How does anxiety play into this, and what are some negative effects it has on us in terms of anxiety?
Well, definitely hyper arousal, like you're always just on guard for something to happen, hypersensitive. It can also lead to irritability because there's a lot of anticipation that something is going to go wrong. And so you're just consistently anxious and, at a high alert all the time, like just basically head on a swivel and just never relax. And that's a lot of tension in your body as well. So that can also lead to other physical problems, your body being tense, increased heart rate. And then, like I said earlier, not even just about the gut health, but your body does a lot of protective things. So if you are constantly fearful, then it's going to try to counter that with some kind of hormone or some kind of action or some kind of reaction to that because it's made to run a certain way. And so if you have too much of whatever hormone, then your body's going to try to fix it. And so then that could make you overproduce something else that you might not need as much of. And
Mm.
that's not scientific because I'm not a scientist, but I know how to explain things a little in lay terms and I understand it, but me explaining it like a scientist would is not is not
and
gonna happen.
and we don't necessarily need science. We need to make it plain, as they say. And I want
Right.
to give an example of anxiety. Okay, everybody watching, and we can do this with me. Make a fist. Now make it tighter, make it tighter, make it tighter. Now hold it. Keep holding it tight till you let go. Tighter.
Yeah, my hand already wants to cramp.
Hmm. Now,
Mm-hmm.
uh, now you had to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this, imagine your hand in that tight fist. That's what your body is like when you stay anxious.
Yes.
And Megan was like, I gotta let it go.
Yeah.
Well, that
Yep.
anxiety in our body, we don't always let go of. And we talk, like you say, or we let it go. And then you're driving and you're cool, there is no anxiety, and a police officer drives right past you. You're back
Mm.
in that moment. And he
Yeah,
stays
even though
driving
you're not
behind
doing
you.
anything. Oh
And
my
he
gosh,
keeps
man,
on
this
behind you.
is bad.
And he just happens to be driving behind you for real. There's nothing there.
Right.
But this is where you are. So now you're driving in this zone, in this moment, and
Mm-hmm.
you aren't able to let it go. So when we stay in that constant state of anxiety, fear, that's what it's doing to our body. So it's like imagine your whole internal being just in knots. When you talk about being in knots, that's
Like
what
in
it
a
is.
big knot. Mm-hmm. And
And
then too, your interaction with other people. So, like mood swings and like I said a little bit earlier, like irritability, depression often is coupled with anxiety, hopelessness, um, lethargy, like just not having enjoyment in things because, I'm sure there is a population of people who were fearful of going outside after that, because
oh yeah,
people were fearful for going outside for less than that. So it's not like that couldn't be a thing, that somebody saw it and said, "Oh, I'm scared I will get pulled over."
yeah, there are people, it's a real fear. Um,
Hmm.
and it's funny, I want to bring up what we hear police officers say. I feared for my life.
Hmm.
Now you have a gun, this person has a spoon.
Not a spoon.
and you fear for your
Orange juice.
life, or some orange juice, and you
Yes.
fear for your life. When you just hear that, what does that bring up in you?
I had to pause so I would have some good language, but I would just say BS. I call
Mm,
BS. And I say that because there are many examples of people who do not look like us or anywhere near our level of brownness who make it safely from situations where they are just waving a knife, waving a gun, cussing everybody out, spitting on, like there are so many examples of that. And then there's examples of, like I said, a child with orange juice or a child doing nothing. Years ago, I did a meeting in my networking group called Blank While Black because I was so irritated by it. It was just when the kid at the university that was like sleep in the lounge that they were bothering.
mhm.
I think it was a girl. She was taking a nap in between classes or something. And so they were like, "Do you belong here?" And they had the whole, everybody there on campus. And there was a young man who was trying to actually sell real estate, and police were called on him. Somebody got in trouble for cutting their yard, like so all of that. So it was just like so irritating and frustrating. And so when people say, "Oh, well, I felt threatened," I think you only feel threatened by a certain type of person. Somehow, different person, same weapon seems to be less threatening.
So true. And I will say, here, we're not here bashing the police. Not all of them are
No,
bad,
that's why I said they're not all like that.
but the ones that are.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
and the problem is where that fear and anxiety comes in when you are just driving, you don't know.
Right.
And that's where the blank wild black comes in. You don't know. You
Hmm.
can be doing something totally innocent and wow, it happens. So that's why it's not just trauma in the police, it's trauma, race in the police. Being black in America. Being black in America, I have said before, and I've made this comment. I'll let you tell me what you think about being black in America is cause for mental dis-ease.
I agree. Just because you don't have to be doing anything. Like I think people really like to in the media, they really like to tie it to criminality and oh, they did this or did that, or they made a sudden move, or they weren't cooperative enough, or they reached in their pocket, or they did like there's all these kind of excuses. But honestly, it doesn't even really matter if you run into the wrong policeman. And that's why I said it's not all of them. We know that. But hey, that kind of doesn't matter to me if I'm getting interacting with the wrong one. You know, that's the one I'm worried about. I'm not necessarily worried about the other ones, but it's if I get the wrong one, then what happens to me? And so
Right.
I think it's a constant state of disease and always kind of being um on point. I actually just when I came back from the conference, I had a couple of incidences at the conference, just experiences, just because, and I know it was because of how we look, because I'm black. Honestly, and it's 2023.
Yeah, it is still there. And how many, you mentioned TASES. Tell them what TASES is, because I have a question I want to ask about that. Tell them about
Oh,
it.
it's Texas Association of Counselor Education and Supervision, and it's part of TCA, which is the Texas Counseling Association.
So, Texas Counseling Association is the professional organization for counselors and therapists, and they
Counselor
have different
education.
divisions.
Hmm.
And she is the president of one division. I'm going to ask you, how many black presidents have they had before you that you're aware of?
I think two.
And how long has TASES been around as a division?
That I don't know for sure, but I know that TCA has been around since maybe the 40s.
And how many black presidents has GCA had?
Two.
Since the 40s, and
I
which
think
is my
it's
point.
two.
Yeah.
Hmm. Two or
And,
three.
and I say that to say, when I talk about being black in America is being in a state of dis-ease, the fact that we can count, the fact that it's an issue, and it is, um, that we are still left out. So, um, and that's part of that trauma. So when we watch what's going on with the police brutality, one of the reasons it's traumatizing, one of the levels, I guess, of trauma is that it's not just a brutality, it is how we are seen in America.
Mm-hmm.
As you said earlier, people watch that. And sometimes you alluded to this, I want to expound on this some more, that is, oh, they shouldn't have done this. So and even with black people saying, we will blame the victim,
Mm-hmm.
um, because something happened. What expound on that a little.
Um, yeah, I think is, kind of buying into that belief that they had to be doing something, because if you're a good black person, then you don't ever have to worry about the police. Like things, that kind of mentality is, I think, passed down in some cases. And so because of that, then it's not like they're saying outright um that they deserved it, but there's kind of this underlying,
Mm-hmm.
if they had just been doing what they were supposed to, or been where they were supposed to, or whatever. But we also know from I don't know, history, that being in the right place does not necessarily have anything to do with anything, or being where you're supposed to be. That doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
anything to do with anything.
Where are you supposed to be?
Yeah, and
With that.
to kind of add to that too, the media part about it, like how we're portrayed in the media versus how other people are. Like when you think in terms of, let's say, a school shooting. Well, this was a troubled young man, and he had mental health issues and just was unable to get help, and blah blah blah. So who do you think that's describing?
A white young man.
Okay, and then you have, well, this person has been in trouble since a juvenile. They were caught stealing from Quick Trip at age 14, and even though the records are closed, but just shows a history of criminality. And then, by the way, here's the picture of them either with a mugshot, or playing on TikTok with a gun, or whatever it is, something that portrays them in a negative light. So we know who that describes.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, I'll say again, same crime, same weapon, same. You could even replace the same people, and it's still going to come out. I can't remember who that was. I think it was the troubled young man that shot up the church. They took to Jack in the Box or something after, or something.
Dylan.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Ruth.
Dylan
I
Ruth.
think. Yeah, they took him to eat,
Mm-hmm.
like on the way to the police station.
And back to how that even ties in with the whole idea of trauma. So when we even you hear the name Dylan Ruth, you can have a response of, ooh, mm, mm.
Hmm.
And even having that response, which we do,
Right.
that's having that negative impact on our body. Or when you just hear the name Breonna Taylor,
Yes.
George Floyd, and there's so many others. I'm just pulling out two. And
Sandra
the fact
Bland.
that Sandra Bland, yes. Um, I'll share I hate to say funny, but ironic story. So shortly after Sandra Bland was killed, I was driving from Houston to Dallas. I was going, we won't say how much over the speed limit I was going, but I was going way over the speed limit. I was pulled over, and they ask you, why are you speeding? So I told them I had to go to the bathroom. Let's
Hmm.
be stopped at that speed. And he said, okay, well, should I just follow you so you could hurry up and get there? He was a white officer. I looked at him and I said, you follow me? That's just not a good look. Just write the ticket real fast. And he agreed. I was taking a chance on joking, but I'm, not trying to get this really horrible ticket. Um,
Hmm.
but he looked and he was like, oh, you're right. And for him, it wasn't like it was this terrible thing. It was almost, you could see in his face, like, oh, that's so bad. That's terrible.
Right.
And this was a white officer, but he was like, oh, damn, you're right. I can't do that. And the fact that that is a reality, that, huh, just that image. But we are re traumatized in a sense, just by hearing the names, because in terms of that anxiety and fear and that response we had, and that, you're in this zone. Just hearing those names can make you go, mm, or but it's a strong response we have. And
Right.
that strong response impacts us physically and mentally. Because you can be in a happy go lucky mood, and let's say you have the TV on, and it's something about, because this happened this week, something was going on with the case with Breonna Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And you're in a happy go lucky mood, and that's the trailer for the news. You have a
And
response.
then why is that a trailer? See, that makes me think when things like that happen, it just kind of makes me think this must be what life was like in ancient society. Like, when everybody was at the Colosseum watching the lions eat people,
Mhm.
and at the lynch parties that people had, in the back in the day. Like, I just feel like that's just putting violence on a public forum. Like, it's just so weird. I don't even know what
Barbaric.
yeah, I can't think of another way to describe that, because why?
Money. Always follow the money. It's about ratings.
Mm-hmm.
And so people will want to watch because they want to know, oh, what just happened? Some from this, did the, like when they're announcing the verdict, of a case like this. You want to
Right.
know what it is. So that's what? Ratings. And then and people want to watch to see if you got off, if you got time, or some people on one side are happy it happened and they want to see it, others who are hurt by it. But I think it goes back to ratings, and ratings equal money.
Right. And
Right.
I was looking at this article that came out like in the Harvard newsletter, not, I guess it's like a magazine, like a couple of years ago, and it was just talking about the physiological health, and the effects of stress and like racism and police brutality. And it says that there is a body of research that is showing that we are accelerated aging, and
Mhm,
that they use the term biological weathering, which is basically we're just kind of living through things and figuring it'll eventually end. And it
mhm.
says African Americans are aging biologically more rapidly than whites. At the same chronological age, African Americans are 7.5 years older or 10 years older on average compared to their white counterparts. Now, I can see that they're saying that, but then also look at us. So I don't know how true that is. I just thought
Mm,
that
mhm.
was interesting, but because I've seen people that I've gone to high school with that look
Sure.
20 years older than me, and people are like, "Oh, you look the same, as you did when you're in school." So I don't know. Maybe we are internally aging, but externally, we're looking good.
True. That is true. Yeah, black don't crack. It just cracks on the inside. But
Right.
it is an interesting thought that internally what could be going on. I'm like you. I want to see some more research into that.
Right,
Um,
and who and how many people are in the study, and all of that. But I just thought that was interesting when I pulled that up, that I was like, huh. Because then when you think about the generation, not like my mom's generation, but my grandmother's generation, and I'm 50, but my grandmother's 50 was not this 50.
mm-mm.
I
Mm,
feel like it was a lot harder. Now she still aged well, you know, physically, but it just seemed like they were so much older. But I think it's just because they went through so much.
right. And society as a whole was harder, but definitely for black people.
Mhm.
Um, but when we look at Make America Great Again, when you think about those who want to make it great again, what do you want to go back to? They refer to the 50s.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they want to go back to the
That's
50s.
not great for us. And
Yeah.
that's when we were aging or even looking older, feeling older
Mhm.
at a younger rate. You're right. A 50-year old then is very different from a 50-year-old now.
Yes.
That's an interesting thought, but it would. I want to read more into that about how we age internally and externally.
Mhm.
We don't look like they do. That's for sure. And
No.
at their age, he's like, you how? Oh, yeah. I remember I ran into someone I went to high school with, and my sister was with me. She said, "Oh, you mean she was one of the teachers, right?" She was not your classmate. I'm like,
That happened at our reunion, at our 25-year reunion. One of the classmates was there, and at the end of the reunion, my friend was like, "That was such and such. I thought that was one of the teachers that just wanted to come celebrate with it." Like the whole time, he thought this man was a teacher, and I was like, "No, he was in our class, and he's a year younger than both of us."
mm-hmm.
And he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah,
So
so that is interesting. But being black in America, as I say, is can keep you in a state of dis-ease. And we have talked a lot about some of the negative sides. So I always like to think of, okay, but now what? What is a positive takeaway? It's hard to find a positive takeaway when we're thinking about racism in America. But I'm going to ask you, just off the cuff, what is a what is something we can do to manage this dis-ease, to manage the fear, to manage the anxiety that will eat away at us and will keep us in that state of tension? What is something we can do to manage that?
number one, I think banding together and working together. And I think we are capable of that. People try to make it like we aren't. But when you look at examples of Black Wall Street and all these other things, the problem wasn't that we couldn't get together. It was that we did get together and people didn't like it. And they felt like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you're not spending enough money or you're too prosperous. And so I'm going to burn it down. So I don't think there's an inability for us to get together, work cooperatively. I hear different things like, oh, everybody wants to be, the chief, and everybody wants their name on the door, and that can't happen. Well, actually, I think it could. I think if we worked in a collaborative setting, and there are 20 doors, and there can be 20 names on 20 doors,
Mm-hmm.
like I just think that can happen. So I think, coming back together and remembering some of those things that have worked for us in the past, that collective, behavior. I also think that the other positive thing is the, I guess, spark to fight and stand up and say something. I think one of the things that made me feel better through the George Floyd situation, and then all the ones that were like piling on it, was actually going to protest and taking a part in it. And not, they were not wild and all that. They were not January the
Mm-hmm.
6th, which was a riot. I said
Mm-hmm.
nothing like that. Okay, these are, peaceful protests, letting people know, recognize that we know what's going on and we're not going to stand for it. And I think that was very helpful, and a good thing that came out of it, because people were banding together, they were working together, and it wasn't just us out there. So then you get to see who the real allies are and who really is, thinking about our well-being.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very important point you make. We can and do work together. It
Yes.
is a myth, and I think part of it is a myth perpetuated by the media, and we
Hmm.
fall prey to it. Of course, I can find an example where we don't, but by and large, we do.
And you can find an example with every other culture about where they don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's still, it's funny how, for us, if one of us does something, then it reflects everybody. But
Yeah.
if one of somebody else does something, then it's just them. They're a troubled person. They're the person that,
Mm-hmm.
that just doesn't reflect on every young white male.
Right. One of us is it's there.
Hmm.
We are at the end of our time, and as I always end, I always like to come up with our call to action, something we can do, and related to this topic. When we think about um, trauma, race, and the police, and being Black in America, it's who we are. Do we have to let the trauma take over us? No, we don't.
Hmm.
Is the trauma real? Yes. Is the fear real? Yes. Is it justified? Yes. But we have to decide if we're going to let the fear take over, or are we just going to live. One definition of fear is false evidence appearing real. Now, the
Right.
evidence is there that the cops can be bad, but it's false evidence that every cop is bad.
Hmm.
So when we find out where the truth is, and the problem is we don't know. When they're in a car and you're in a car, you don't know. When they come to your window, you don't know who you're going to get.
Right.
But when we learn to breathe and let some of that go, we can change who we are. So the first thing is to breathe your way through it, work your way through it, and find things to manage the stress associated with just being Black in America and that state of dis-ease. Find your ways. So, number two, support each other. As we begin to support each other and be that support system, so we're walking through this daily traumatizing feeling, be able to have someone you can talk to about it, and say, hey, who this happened? I'm feeling it is racism, but not someone who's just going to beat it up. No, be able to get it out, work a solution rather than just talking about the negative. Find
Mm,
solutions to dealing with it. Um, get mental health help. It can be a problem. It can. So if
right.
you find yourself um, overly fearful, overly anxious, overly depressed, overly worried, it's time to get mental health help. Both Megan and I are mental health professionals, so obviously we believe in it. And I always say, my role is I'm here to help you become a better you. You can reach out to me. I may not be the therapist for you. I am not the therapist for everybody. Don't try to be. I want you to find who's good for you. So reach out. My number is 682-272-3949. Megan, how can people, I know you work with high achieving Black women. How can they reach you?
They can reach me online at thevococo.com. That's THE, V as in Victor, O, C as in Cat O, C as in Cat O.com. And that is also our social media handle at the Vococo on all platforms. You can find out you can schedule with me there. We do a free consultation first just to make sure that I'm a good fit and I can help you with what you're coming in for. And then we move on from there.
And I'm at ablecnc.org. So, my last point will always be an educated voter. Why? Who you vote for and put into office impacts every area of your life. Some of the trauma that we're feeling has to do with the people that we have voted in. So be that educated voter, not just during election season, but be an educated voter now so you know how to vote when election season rolls around. I will see you next week. Thanks, Megan, for joining us.
Thank you.